Welcome back. You're doing less once more with John and Jeff. Thanks for joining us. And we're going to be talking today about Andrew Yang, who's now out of the election campaign. His campaign has ended.
R.I.P.
Did we talk about him at all on any previous podcasts? I feel like
I think we did a little bit, but
maybe a little bit,
not extensively from what I remember.
There's a lot to talk about. I guess one of the relevant things is the kind of idea that in order to become president, you have to be a little bit of a psychopath. Like you have to be able to put just like the campaign ahead of like your personal life and like your family. And I feel like Andrew Yang, of all the Democratic candidates, maybe not of all, but he was definitely one of the top like real people. Like he was willing to have like real conversations with, like he was on Joe Rogan, like you said, he was on Eric Weinstein podcast, just having long form, like completely off the cuff, unprepared conversations about, real stuff. Tulsi Gabbard was another one who had some long form conversations, but she's also not doing too well, so that's a good example.
And he just seemed like a genuine, decent person, which is like, obviously I don't know any of these candidates personally, but like they are not, when it comes to like appearing human, they are not doing less. They are doing the most. Like their skin is human, but like you can tell there's like either a robot or a lizard underneath, because it's like it just does. There's something off when they talk. It's just very not genuine.
Yeah, like Elizabeth Warren, who came out and said she got approached by a college student with $6 in her bank account, and she said, "I only have $6, but I'm giving you $3 because that's how important you are to me."
Right, like she used that as like an example of how like important this fight is. Like people are giving her like their last $3, or I guess not their last three, but their second to last $3. And like it's just the fact that she thought that was like a good story to tell is just very like, I don't know, it's like that $3 is so much more important to that girl than the Elizabeth Warren campaign. Like she's not even doing well in the polls anymore. Like it's that money's going to get wasted at this point. So it's just like for her to just take that money.
I bet you that there was a script running in Elizabeth Warren's head that was like, "Oh, what's this girl going to say? Oh, I'm giving you money. Oh, money, that's good. Oh, it's only $3. Oh, $3, that's not good." But she said, find a spin. Oh, I can use this story to gain positive, to garner positive, like new voters. That's a positive. I'm going to actually get more out of the story than a measly $3. I'm going to get an actual story where I can connect with people.
Right.
Just like how off base she is.
Dude, my impression of her is just like someone told her once that telling people stories is like a good way to connect with people and like relay information. And like it seems like she always has a story to tell, but it doesn't feel like this is something she genuinely cares about. It's just like she's telling this. It feels like someone told her to do that.
Right. Or she's just completely fabricating it. Like she's
like the Native American thing. Like,
yeah,
that's the thing. Like, if you like Elizabeth Warren, right? I want you to ask yourself: do you really, actually, full-heartedly think this person is like the best candidate, or is it just that like she looks good relative to your options? Because that's the whole thing, right? It's like honestly, the options out there feels like a high school student board election. Like, are these really the best people in America? You know what I mean? Like, yeah. It seems like actually the president selects for the worst people. Like, the only people that want to be president are just terrible.
Yeah, so that brings me right back to what I was beginning with. It's like, is the role of the president selecting for somebody who is, has the traits where they can put their campaign over, being personable or being family oriented. Mm-hmm. So in that way, it's kind of not surprising that we see the end of Andrew Yang's,
right?
Which is where I was gonna. But because Andrew Yang was probably one of the more personable, more like down to earth and like understanding candidates on the Democratic side.
Yeah, I mean, he just seems like a genuinely good dude. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like I'd have to meet any of the other people for me to be able to say that about them. Like, I just don't get that like, I don't know who any of these people really are. You know what I mean? It's just they're all fake.
Yeah, certainly. So that's what we have good to say about Andrew Yang. But we do want to address the focal point of his campaign, which was universal basic income. So there's a kind of economic side of that you can dissect, but we were going to actually come at it first from the more emotional side that he kind of appealed to, which was the idea that it's inevitable that humans are getting displaced from the workforce, kind of period. Like that's like the statement. So be afraid of this thing called technology. The technological advancement is displacing humans from working, from being able to find jobs, which on its surface is pretty. You can look into history and see this is it's a common appeal to emotion, with the advent of basically every new technology. People would say, oh, the invention of the plow is going to put farmers out of work.
Right.
And it's like, yeah, it did, but those people went and found other jobs. You know what I mean? So it's like,
right.
It's kind of relatively, it's not new. It's not a new thing that's just happening. New technology is making us better and more productive. So, but the idea of AI, I guess, is the novel aspect of his argument.
Well, I think there's like a lot of things wrong with this mentality. And so one is like over focus on jobs. We talked about this in the last podcast, actually, where people look at the unemployment rate as an indication of how well we're doing. But it's like jobs it's not a commodity. Not all jobs are the same. And so most people's job used to be a farmer. In fact, before the Industrial Revolution, like 90% of people were farmers. Like, look at us today, They could not even conceive of the jobs that exist in our world today. Just like if we're replacing all these people, we can't conceive of the jobs that'll exist because we won't recognize a world like that. But that doesn't mean there's not going to be, like, I think the thing I find most distasteful with this mentality is if you think people get put out of work and that's like such a bad thing, the underlying assumption in there is that person's time isn't valuable, right? Like, the reality is humans' time is valuable. Humans are the smartest thing on the planet. And even if we can replace them doing certain tasks, we can't replace all of their intelligence and all the things that make people human. And so there's a scarce resource of human ability and human intelligence. And the more you can free people's time up to use that, the better, because it's valuable. And so, like, for you to say, oh no, we're freeing up all these people's time, this is dangerous, you're inherently saying those people's time isn't valuable. In fact, it's a detriment to our society. Mm-hmm. By freeing up all their time, this is a problem. Like, that's just a very pessimistic view of humanity that I just fundamentally am not going to subscribe to. And I think the evidence stands against it.
Right. Yeah, I like to think that if I had more time, that would be awesome. I have like a list of things I would do. I would read more and learn an instrument, and I think this is actually what Joe Rogan's response to someone was. It's just like, yeah, like I have that doesn't even cross my mind. That's like if I had more free time, people think, oh, like, what am I going to do? It's like, that's not even like a concept for me. It's like, I'll keep myself busy. I'll find something to do. I'll find something that's worthwhile, something that's keeps me stimulated and as long as I'm getting better at something, like I can just work towards something that's
Mm-hmm.
meaningful, and there's like a positive reward associated with just that freedom, that ability to do what you
Mm-hmm.
want. Yeah, I agree with that. And just looking at history, like I said, there's always just that consistent factor of people just find new jobs, like new jobs that you can't even conceive of. Like
Right.
my
Or
my
they
example
create
is,
them.
yeah, my example is like Fortnite streaming or like video game streaming. Was like that was completely like even what 5 years ago, 8 years ago, that was
Right.
like I'm gonna play video games for money. It's just like, oh, you're dreaming. It's just like
Right.
today it's like, oh, I'm gonna play video games for money. Oh yeah, what service do you use? Yeah, like Twitch. Oh yeah, how much money do you make? Yeah, like it's just like that stuff. That's exactly, to me, that's such a positive development of like,
Right.
oh, I would have had to work in a coal mine when I was 18, but now I play video games, which is something I do for leisure, and I get
Mm-hmm.
paid to do that. Like yeah, that's purely beneficial. That's purely positive. I guess the only thing you could say is like, oh, someone in the coal mines learned discipline and learned how to make
Yeah.
like real work, which I agree.
I mean, that's
There's
kind of true, but
yeah.
does that mean we should just prevent? And that's another thing is like, there's this idea or this concept. Well, actually, Andrew Yang doesn't believe this. He doesn't think we can prevent it. Some people think you can prevent it, right? Innovation, but you can't, because the reality is the reason we seek innovation and efficiency is because it makes our lives better.
Mm-hmm.
You know, why would we, as a society, all be seeking things that are like just ultimately going to cause our demise? Like, it's just not. We're not going to do that. So, I mean, as an aggregate, we might, but as individuals, we're not. Like, at the end of the day, there's someone who wants the truck to drive itself
Mm-hmm.
because it's cheaper. And if it's cheaper, then he's saving money and he can spend that money on something else, right? So it's like, if I spent, if farming was not automated, right? So there's no tractors, there's no equipment, there's nothing. The people who are farming are not going to be able to make enough food for all of us, right? So the price of food is going to skyrocket. And now suddenly all the other things I have in my life, I can't afford. I can only afford to buy food now. So that's all the other things we like about life would go away. So the cheaper you can make everything you currently have, then it opens the door to more. Suddenly you can have new stuff, right? And that's the key here. So if we automate truck driving, which Andrew Yang was like, okay, that's terrible. We can't. All these people are going to be unemployed. Yes, it's going to be hard for those people in the short run. But in the long run, everything's going to be cheaper as a result. And I mean everything, because we ship everything. So truck driving is one of the biggest industries in the country. So if we can automate this and lay off that many people in man hours, that's a huge cost reduction all across the board for everything we use. And so, yeah, it's going to be temporarily painful for those guys. But when they figure out what they can now do with their time, everything that if they can find, create something of value or do something of value, suddenly everything's cheaper for them too. So we all benefit in the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my response when I hear about the detriment of losing your job to technology, to losing your job to like a net beneficial aspect of society, like we're doing it easier, cheaper, more efficient. I think it's actually that's actually a symptom. That's not actually the cause of the problem. It's a symptom of a deeper problem, and that deeper problem is our society's stress on spending, which kind of comes back to Andrew Yang too, with his universal basic income. A big reason he is a proponent for universal basic income is to put more money in the hands of people for spending, so that spending increases and GDP goes up, which is we talked about that in the last episode. So
ad nauseum.
Yeah, so spending going up is just kind of this inherently good thing, and and what's lost in that is the idea that thrift and saving is actually so important for every economic agent that's participating in society, in the economy. So that truck driver, if he was encouraged to save rather than spend, right, he may be able to work for 20 years, 15 years, and save up to be able to afford to spend 2-3 years of unemployment, no problem. He's able to. He can take that in stride because he was able to develop a strong cash reserve, a strong rainy day fund.
Mm-hmm.
That's advertised in pretty much every personal finance literature that I've been able to find in my research, right? But that's overshadowed by this political, like the politicians kind of have that as like as second or as non-existent to the idea of spending.
Mm-hmm.
Make it easier for people to spend, make it, interest rates lower, make liquidity more available so that there's more spending, there's more products, there's more spending, increase the GDP that way. No politician is talking. No, I've never heard in this debate come up by a politician. What's the actual systemic reason why none of these truck drivers have any savings saved up? Like, that's not normal to me. In a society, I think there should be a degree of thrift that should be promoted and saying, like, you could lose your job and it's not the worst thing. Just make sure you're prepared for that. Make sure you have something saved up.
Right. I do think part of that is, and I think this is another idea that's not, people often misunderstand, is that money is fungible. And what that means is, say, you want someone, like food stamps is a perfect example. If I have a total income, I'm going to spend some portion of it on food. Okay. Now, if I say I want to help you out, right? But I only want to help you out towards food. So I'm going to give you these things called food stamps that can only be used on food. It's like, okay, so now I bought the food and I didn't use any of my money. I only used the food stamps. So now I have the money to spend on, that I was going to spend on food, to spend on whatever I want. So it's like, you can't give someone money that only goes towards something, because whatever money you're sparing them for that something can go to whatever else they want.
Right.
So, like, if you're giving someone something that amounts to money they would have spent anyway, then there's no difference. And so this goes back to, there's things like unemployment benefits and things like that if you lose your job. So if those options are available to you, you're not going to save as much because you don't need to. So this goes back to that idea, is like, and the same thing with Andrew Yang's universal basic income. He's like, okay, I'm going to give everyone $1,000 a month. Well, some people only want to work as much as they need to work. So let's say you, like, to cover your standard of living, whatever you want your standard of living to be, is $50,000 a year. A lot of people work like part-time or gig or whatever, and they make the amount of money they need to make, and that's how much they work. Now, if you give them 12 grand, they might just cut 12 grand of time they spend working out of their budget, right? And so now there's 12 grand less of service being provided to the rest of the economy from that person. So you're just taking away from the supply as much as you're adding to it. And it's like, yeah, you might get spending, but people do this so often, is like, spending is good because we make things and we need people to spend on them, or else we go out of business. It's like, okay, but if someone is spending money on your stuff that wasn't backed by some kind of creation of value, like they didn't create anything in return, then that money they gave you is kind of like fake in a sense, right? It's not it's not backed by anything you want. We don't want money. Like, money, I feel like, is this abstraction that gets a lot of people confused, right? Like, at the end of the day, we don't want money. We want stuff. Okay. And so if you're on a desert island and you use seashells as currency, you don't really want the seashells, right? You want like food, shelter, these kinds of things. And if you're the only one hunting, building huts, and whatever, and everyone's handing you seashells, fat lot of good that does you, because they're not making anything you want. If you're the one making everything, it doesn't matter what everyone else is, how many seashells everyone else has. It's irrelevant. At the end of the day, what you want is stuff. And money is a way of representing that you've added value. So if you're not actually adding value and you get money, all it's going to do is decrease or increase the price of all the things that we do want, because there's more money out there for fewer and fewer goods. And that's inflation.
I think I heard somewhere that there were societies that used seashells as money, and that's where the word clams come from, or like when people refer to like to give someone 10 clams, in reference to giving $10, it's like referencing like it's what they actually transacted in clams as their currency. But anyway, yeah, that's major. That's a major response to this idea that like the idea that deficits don't matter, which no matter what side you're on, Democrat or Republican, you really don't, unless you're actively, like us, speaking out against your party or against your representation. Every person in this country that's represented by a Democrat or Republican is basically ceding that they disagree with what Jeff just said, right? Deficits don't matter. Like Republicans and Democrats spend at a deficit. They sign these $1 trillion spending bills. They raise the debt ceiling. They just do it on autopilot, essentially, because there's just this air of, oh, we can just keep spending at a deficit because nothing bad happened so far, and no one's telling us not to, so we're just going to keep doing it. So some people say, yeah, that's actually fine. That's actually exactly the case. Nothing bad will ever happen. But if you believe what Jeff just said, that like paper bills or clams in exchange for something has to be eventually traded for something else. Like you can't just, it's not just a one way. Like you can't just create currency that everyone's going to accept always. There's always a point at which point people are like, okay, you've given me enough dollars. I need something in return now.
Right. Like that's like the whole point of money is to represent value. It's so that it can be exchanged for stuff. So if we're creating all this money that's not backed by stuff, then it's like you're clearly diluting the value of money, because it's not like its whole purpose is being defeated if you're just creating it without backing it by value. You're completely like you're making the proportion of money that actually represents anything smaller and smaller. And then what happens? The prices of everything go up. People aren't stupid. They figure this out eventually. Right.
And I really think that you have to, if you argue that no, that's not the case. If you argue that deficits really don't matter, and sovereign governments or governments can issue sovereign currency as much as they want, you have to be able to defend yourself from the argument that's like, okay, well, if you're right, what's the limit? What's the limiter? So in Andrew Yang's case, it's like, okay, $1,000. What's the reason that $1,000 is right and $2,000 is wrong? For all the reasons that you're arguing that $1,000 is right to give someone per month, right? It's going to help them out. They'll have more money to save, or they'll have more money to spend, is really what you said, not save. It'll grow the economy. It'll do all these things. Okay, that sounds awesome. Let's make it $2,000 per month. Let's make it $3,000 per month.
Right.
Let's make it. I mean, I was really thinking at the extreme, like these people that really are proponents for this. What stops you from saying any person that ever comes up with, at any time, a idea of spending, just any idea of spending,
Right.
What stops that government from saying, yeah, I'll pay for it. Spending is good.
Right, exactly.
Spending is not good. Like, you can't just say that and then say, like, oh, like, everyone, like, I think I should go on vacation. The government writes you a check. Oh, I think I want to start a business. The government writes you a check. Oh, I think I want to to sell rocks that I find in my backyard. The government writes you a check. All this is spending. All this is increasing GDP, right? You have to come up with a reason why that's not good. Well,
right.
That's clearly not good, right?
Yeah, I think we've gotten so abstracted in our models and our like data is like we've just like lost common sense. Like, like clearly, like you have to figure out what is the driving force. Like people talk about this with minimum wage, and they'll say, okay, like our case is, if $10 an hour is good, why not 20? Why not 30? And people go, oh, well, that's the same thing as saying a little bit of medicine is good. Why not more medicine is better? So clearly that's not the case. It's like, yeah, but you can point to specific reasons
Right.
why it's not okay with the medicine example. I can tell you why more medicine is not okay. It's because there's limits on your organs like your kidneys and your liver that cannot process more drugs per hour or whatever per day than a specific amount. And if you give a person more than that, those organs will shut down and stop working, and that person will die. I can point to exactly why more medicine is not good. But now you do that. You tell me why $1,000 of UBI is good and 2,000 is not. Like why 2,000 is bad. And I have not seen any of these people explain what is the other mechanism at play. Like this is really an optimization problem. If it simply must have a maximum, right? Because otherwise it just goes to infinity. The benefit is just whatever you want to spend money on, more. Whatever the UBI is, more. Whatever the minimum wage is, more. There must be another force driving this utility down to achieve a maximum. And what is that? That's what I want to know. It's like no one has identified this for me. So, if you know what this other force is, please feel free to leave that in the comments. But what I would tell you this force is it's inflation.
Right.
And that starts at the beginning of the curve. I think it's just negative through and through.
Yeah, that's a great point. He might, like, I don't know, I'm taking if I was to fill Yang's shoes right now, I might say like, oh, we don't know, but that's the whole point. It's an experiment. I would respond. So to be back in my shoes, to be back in John's, I'd say, okay, so if you're pledging to do an experiment, you get elected president, well then you're promising to me to run this experiment, you will not change any single other measure of policy, of government policy, except this, right? Because you have to create the comparison. Like that's the problem. Like in medicine, you can tell me, a doctor or like a biologist can tell me within like a degree of accuracy, or like they can estimate to a degree of accuracy what exactly the number of milligrams of whatever drug that you're taking will overdose or will send this organ into to failure mode.
Right. It does depend on the person a little bit, but it's
but the biologist would probably be able to take and calculate that. There's actual calculations, there's actual studies, there's actual controls. With economics, running an experiment, it's so different, right? To say $1,000, let's give it a shot. It's like, okay, well, you have to be able to be willing to control for every other variable, and if that's the case, you have to be willing to see if it fails, because if it doesn't, if you're not willing to see that, then it's not really an experiment.
Right, and you can only do it in part of America, because if you did it in all of America, then you have no control. You have nothing to compare it to. So it's like, that's fundamentally the problem with government, is we go, oh, this idea is good, but we've never tested it, right? And so we're just going to implement this throughout America with nothing to compare it to figure out if it worked or didn't. And then we're just going to assume it did or it didn't. You know, like we have no frame of reference because we have no controls. And so we just do stuff.
Yeah.
And we don't know why. Like, why are we doing all this stuff if there's no evidence that any of it actually works.
Right. It's tough. We just really need like common sense to prevail, which, like you said, it's in short supply. Not a lot of people are looking at this common sense like, no, we can't just print money to become. In fact, every time that has been tried is ended disastrously. So it's just like, it's just people are willing to overlook that. So
yeah, I mean, the reality is that like this type of stuff happens over and over and over again throughout history. So it's like, why do we expect anything else though? It's like we're kind of the fools if we expect anything different.
Yeah. Well, you can always get better, and that's why we're here trying to get better. We're trying
to do less.
Yeah. I did have an analogy for what we were talking about before with the savings that I don't know if I should say it now because we kind of left that topic. But
with this, like, what about savings?
What you were saying with like, this like having the safety net actually impacts the amount
how much you save.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Throw it at me.
Okay, I'll say it quick. So I was driving down the road. I was driving on the highway, and I realized that there was a gas station fairly often, right? To the point where I was like running low on gas.
This is classic. I've done this before.
I was running low on gas, and I was just like, I could go another 10 miles, because I was that confident that there was another gas station on the next exit. Well, I was right. I was able to get gas, and as I was filling my gas, I was like, that was probably not, I don't know if it was like not smart because, I want to get, it wasn't like not smart because I was willing to bet that there was going to be another gas station, and I was basing that on the fact that there are always so many gas stations that I ended up not pulling over the side of the road with no gas. So if you hear that story and you say, oh, I never want anyone to run out of gas on the side of the road, that sounds terrible. You may be tempted to enact a government regulation that says you need to have a gas station every 5 miles on the highway, right?
Yeah.
If you do that, then you're going to have probably very little people pulling over on the side of the highway with no gas. But it's almost like if you do that, there might still be people that will just not learn that, like, they're just that safety net of having, there's going to be the next exit will have a gas station, the next exit will have a gas station. That there actually will still be people that will get caught 2.5 miles in between exits without gas. Now, conversely, if there's only a gas station every 200 miles or something crazy, right? Every gas station you see, you're stopping at,
right?
Because if you don't, you're gonna like run out of gas. So it's just like the environment that within which you operate affects how you act at the stimulant, like the given stimulus.
I think this is such an important point, right? We enact policies thinking that current behaviors and decisions will continue on exactly as they are when the new policy takes effect. But the policy affects people's decision making. It changes their behaviors, which changes the environment.
Right.
So you can't expect the environment to stay exactly the same in all other aspects, enact this policy, and just reap whatever benefits. Because it's like by enacting the policy, you're changing the system. You're changing the incentives. You're changing the behavior. And so you're not going to just get the exact outcome you thought you would, because it's going to influence things.
Yes, exactly. So, yeah, I was thinking about it. I was like, having the gas station every 200 miles, well, one way to reduce the number of people that pull over on the side of the road without gas is you could increase the number of gas stations, A, or B, you could just put up a sign that says this is the last gas station for 200 miles. In the second scenario, you're probably still going to have more people than in the first scenario. Have to, run out of gas. But the marginal cost of opening a gas station every 5 miles versus just putting up a sign, it's probably not even compared. Like those signs probably saved like half the cars, whereas those gas stations every 5 miles probably saved 90% of the cars, but cost like not infinite, like 200 times more or whatever that is, 20 times.
Right. And this is another thing
more.
I think government just gets wrong all the time is how do you figure out, okay, this is a good thing, but when is it too much of a good thing, right? Like it's good to have doctors, right? We want more doctors. And probably the limiting factor on the number of doctors we have is actually the number of qualified people. Maybe. I'm not sure. I'm not an expert on this, but I imagine that's part of the factor. I think there's a lot of people who are just honestly not cut out for being doctors because it's hard. But, what if that wasn't the case? What if like everyone really was able to be a doctor if they really wanted to? Okay. Well then, how many doctors is too many doctors? What if everyone was a doctor? That's too many doctors, right? Now we have no food. No one's growing food. We don't want everyone to be a doctor. So clearly there's a point at which there's too many doctors, right? And then if no one knows how to be a doctor, that's too little, right? So there's a maximum somewhere. And how do you find that, right? Well, the answer is markets find out through prices, right? If the price of going to the doctor is absurdly high, like you're like, oh my God, like I can't, my knee hurts, but I can't go. This is because it would bankrupt me. I'm not going to go to the doctor. I just can't. Well, that's a signal to people, hey, become a doctor. It's, insanely lucrative. And so that tells many people to get into the field of being a doctor because it's like where all the money is. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then you'll get more doctors. Right. And now suddenly if you get tons and tons and tons of people being doctors, they're not going to be able to charge insane prices for their services anymore. And now suddenly being a doctor doesn't really seem so worth it because the price is too low. And so this is how we figure out the proper number of the things we need. The problem is government does not have this tool because the government is a monopoly on everything. It can't figure out the optimum thing because it doesn't exchange with anyone. It's not buying and selling. It's just collecting taxes. It's going to get the taxes it's going to get whether you like it or not, right? So like if their policy was bad, you can't say, okay, well, I'm only going to give you 10% taxes this year because this policy was terrible this year. No, they're going to take it out. You don't have a choice. So they have no feedback loop in which they can fine tune their policies because they get your taxes whether you like it or not. And so it's just inherently less efficient at solving our problems. So this is why we say the government needs to do less because it's not good at solving problems. There's some problems it has to solve. We have no other, way of dealing with certain things. Like, some people say you could have a private military. I think that's a load of baloney. I think military is inherently a function of like a state, and that needs to be handled by the state. Mm-hmm. And like things like there are things you can point to where this is like there's no way you can have a market sort this out. Mm-hmm. And that's when you turn to government. It's the option of last resort because it's going to be horribly inefficient. Like the military, for example, something like 25% of the military budget is unaccounted for. We have no idea what it's spent on. It's just the accounting is not, the books just don't tell us what it goes to. So just 25% of that budget, just we don't know. So that gives you an indication of how efficient these things run.
Goes to Area 51.
Yeah, it's for the aliens. Yeah, I don't even think they're hiding anything. I think it's literally it's like complacency, right? Like what incentive do they have to manage their books right and keep their costs down? It's like they don't have it. So it's just like, oh, what did that go to? I don't know. I didn't keep the receipt, Yeah.
So that was a bit of a tangent, but that was a good one, I think. The other thing that I wanted to mention about Andrew Yang, well, it's actually not anything Andrew Yang said, to my knowledge, but it's something I've heard of in the rhetoric of this debate. is the idea that technology should be limited because at some point technology is going to replace, like at some point humans are going to be indistinguishable from robots that we create. So it's like at that point, that's not good for anyone. If you can just replace, the people that you interact with on a daily basis with robots, this is what
we'll do.
Then, what, isn't that a bad thing? So
hashtag replace John with a robot.
If you so before you start talking about whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing, I just want to point to, so what I think that the logic behind this argument is, I think is inherently faulty, which I want to address first, which is the idea that for pretty much all of history that we can remember, technology has been increasing extremely fast, call exponential, in certain ways you define it, like the number of transistors on a computing chip. There's certain patterns that are like actually like exponential that you can say at this rate it's inevitable. There's going to be a point in the future where technology can do everything. Mm-hmm. That's so scary. That's going to take everyone's job. Like that's just like the conclusion is jumped to by that argument. But I would say the difference between that is that every step of the way, every piece of technology that was developed, there has been somebody with something to gain that said, I want to develop this. Everything, right? We mentioned self-driving technology on this podcast. There's people that stand to gain so much money from self-driving technology. If they could push a button that says, my fleet that's currently being driven, drive itself, that's just like they push that button and they will front an upfront cost probably, but then we'll see a return, every year thereafter. So it's like that person will press that button. When it comes to something like sweeping human replacement technology, like who would benefit from that? Like I don't see a person pushing that button and making that replacement. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, like, exactly, right? It's like, at the end of the day, there's always going to be scarcity. Like, you cannot, this is the thing that people really, I think, always need to go back to, is that everything is scarce, okay? And while you may be able to invent robots that are self-driving, and they do this amazing self-driving, maybe robots are also good at fly fishing. That was a terrible example. Maybe they're really good at flying planes and
fishing.
Fishing.
And fly fishing.
I couldn't think of anything. But my point is, there's other things that technology is going to be good at. And so, potentially, and so you're going to want the technology to be able to do what you want it to do as cheaply as possible, as efficiently as possible, and nothing else, right? If you want your cars automated, if you don't want to pay a driver, if you want to pay a robot to do it, and that's cheaper, you're not also going to pay that robot to be good at baseball. Like that's not
right.
That's added technology and engineering that you don't need, right?
Right.
So the idea that we're going to make these like think about humans. Humans cost so much money to raise, to learn, to teach, to be a human is very expensive. It takes a lot of resources and investment to make a human. And so that's part of why humans are so adaptive and we can do all these different things, just because there's this lot of time, a lot of learning period. Like you're useless until the age of like 8. So like there's at least 8 years of just investment in this useless thing as it learns and figures out the world before it can even do anything, right?
Yeah.
And so, when it comes to a robot, it's like you don't want all that other stuff. You just want it to do the one job that you assigned it to do better than a human. But you don't want it to do all the other things better. You don't want it to like tell stories better than a human too. Like, I don't see why anyone would make this thing that's just better than a human at everything all at the same time.
Right.
Right? Because what are you replacing humans for? Like, unless you don't have any friends, like that's the only thing. Like, but even then, you just maximize it at friendship or something. I don't know.
Yeah. So so that's one. So the example I was thinking of is like, oh, if you need like food service or like customer service, like where people are more comfortable with like a human bringing their food at a restaurant, or like if they have to go into like a T-Mobile store and like change their cell phone plan, maybe they are more comfortable with like a smiling face smiling back at them and telling them, this is the better plan or whatever, and having that actual attendant there. So okay, so if you make that argument that these companies are willing to put that investment into creating an actual lifelike human robot, right? Well, that robot will be designed to operate 24/7 nonstop behind the desk or behind, at the restaurant. They'll design, if they're able to design it in that manner, they're going to design it the exact way they want it, which is to have no lapse of productivity. If you have that robot wanting to check out, or like to clock out after their shift is over at 5 p.m., right? Then you've just sacrificed your earning potential on that robot, right? You're gonna, if you have to create the robot to want to have like a work-life balance and like to clock out, like you have to be willing to recognize that, and that has to make the product better, the robot better at performing its function, which I just don't see why that would be necessary if you can already design it to do exactly what you want it to do.
Right. The only place where I could see this like running into trouble is, let's say you start having robots do sort of predictive behaviors. Like an entrepreneur, right? An entrepreneur, that's not, a repetitive task, right? It's a very creative thing. It's like you're basically looking at what you think people want and trying to meet that with the available resources that exist. Now, if you try to make a robotic entrepreneur, maybe you'll make a good one and it'll actually start businesses that are successful. It's hard to even imagine what a robotic entrepreneur would be like, but it's like, I don't know, let's say you could do it. And then now suddenly your robotic entrepreneur is like starting to say things like, like we need to make human melting technology. And you're just like, wait, why? Like, but like there's always going to be like a purpose, right? So like when it starts to say some weird shit, like you always hit the off button, right? Like it's still fulfilling some kind of role for you. Like until we just basically say the robots tell us what to think, until then, like, you could always second guess it, even if it's replacing, you as an entrepreneur, you can always be like, no, I'm not going to make a human melting company. I'm good. I'm like good on that front. Like, I'll turn you off now, you know, like it's so the people who are worried about like this takeover in every aspect, it's like, yeah, they may automate like all the jobs as we know it, but we'll make new higher level jobs while the robots are doing all those things. And our standard of living is just going to be higher because everything we have today is going to be basically a given. And then there's going to be this new standard of living that we don't even really understand. That's going to be like on top of that.
Right. Yeah. I do agree. I think some very influential, smart people, Elon Musk thinks that like it's not going to be the ability to have the off switch will actually be lost when we create robots that can create robots. And then at that point we become unhinged from the process and we lose our ability to like step in and say to stop that. And so to that, I guess I agree, but I just think that we shouldn't be like doing that. It's like playing with fire.
So let's say you make robots that create robots, but like again, this comes back to like
why would you do
what does that seed robot do? Like the first robot that you make, what kind of robots is it making and for what reason, right? If you're just making hyper intelligent robots whose sole purpose is to procreate, okay, you just made another species. But like, why did you do that?
Right.
Maybe you just want to watch the world burn, and that's plausible. Maybe some mad genius could do such a thing. But like, at the end of the day, like, someone had to basically envision a new type of life form that they like decided to make. And it's like, there's not really an incentive to do that.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, forego profit in that,
right,
like, indefinitely to just like see what'll happen.
Right. And another thing is, again, resources are scarce. So even if the robot can make other robots, who's it buying that material from? Like, a person, no? Like, you can't just automatically replace everything with robots. Like, there's still going to be people controlling certain things. And suddenly the robot's like, I need 8 million tons of steel. And you're like, what? Why? And what are you going to pay me for it? And it's like, okay, where does it get the money for it? What's it doing that's contributing? Like,
right.
I don't know. It, like, if it's as good as a person, it's going to be providing as much value as a person would. And so we're just going to be benefiting from it.
I guess I'm thinking of the plot of Ex Machina. Have you seen that?
Yeah, a while ago.
So that guy was creating an artificial intelligence, like, lifelike robot. But he was just doing it because he was like, he just wanted to make like a real...
Right. But like, think about how many resources he was destroying in the process.
Right.
Like, the amount of his time spent in that, whatever tech was needed to go into, like, all those things could have been spent doing something else. And so he's foregoing a lot to achieve this goal. And that's what we're saying. It's like, there's this strong disincentive to just create like malevolent technologies. Like,
right.
It's just because it's wasteful. There's profits to be made. Right. Like, there's an incentive to be using technology towards the ends that people want you to use it for. And so, like, really, I think where we should be concerned is systems where the incentives are misaligned. They're pointed badly.
Right.
And I don't see this as one of those systems.
Yeah, that's a good summary. Well, I think I'm about done with this one.
Yeah, me too.
Anything else to say? All right.
R.I.P. Yang.
Yeah.
Not that I would even like him as president, but
no, right.
I would like if just a good dude was president,
Yeah.
Or a woman.
Wonder what that would be like.